Glad to be here today. This is going to be the first probably non-technical conversation of the day for everybody, I'm hoping. And hopefully we're not going to bore you too much around it, but we're going to take a different pivot and not talk about building things per se, but about kind of the transformation of the banking industry around fintech and what that means, and some of the things that we've gone through at JP Morgan that might be interesting to some folks. So a little bit different of a topic for everybody, and hopefully you guys enjoy it a bit. Who am I? So I'm Jack Gibson. I am the Global Head of Architecture for Payments at JP Morgan. A couple different roles within that that kind of apply to this audience. The first is my team runs all the technical due diligence for M&A. So all you startups up there that want to eventually get bought, if you get bought by us or going through an IPO, you're going to run across my team. I also run our API and developer experiences platforms, the dev console that we're building out right now and releasing, and also own a couple other things around SRE, data architecture, and some other bits around there. Based here in Austin, Texas. Been here for about 7 years. So been at JP Morgan for about 7 years. Prior to this current role, I was the one who helped build out Chase International Bank, the whole cloud platform and DevOps. So don't spend as much time in front of a keyboard over the last year or two, but prior to that, was totally heads down. So a little bit we're going to talk about today. I'm going to frame the problem a little bit. We're going to talk what didn't work and how we built out some of our platforms and how we transformed the business or are transforming the business. We're going to talk about where we're going and some of the takeaways around that. Pretty straightforward. So what are some of the problems that we're having on developing a new product, right? The organization really is kind of what we experience as the problem per se. We're kind of entrenched about how we think about what we do as a business. And so when we think about, hey, I want to execute a payment or I want to sell a payment, well, really we're selling a banking service. We're selling a relationship. And so typically in the past, we worked directly with the CFO, we worked directly with the Treasury Department, and we really kind of thought about ourselves as a relationship management firm versus a technology firm. We didn't sell the technology product. The other problem we have is it's very disruptive to change the organization. So as we start thinking about how we offer products and build products differently, it really disrupts the organization. And particularly when you have an organization of our size, it's really hard to move that organization around, right? If you have a 12-person team or a 20-person company, it's really easy to kind of shift things. When you have almost 300,000, it's a lot harder. And there's some things that we noticed as we were going through the process that really kind of forced us to change about how we were thinking about things and how we were interacting with the broader organization as well as our customers. So I talked a little bit about this, the traditional way of doing business. Our sales teams would show up at a client, meet with the CFO, meet with the treasurer, they go through a presentation, they create a proposal, and this would go on for a couple months as they work through it. And really to become a client, it would take somewhere between 30 days to 6 months, right? So I talked to you once, and it's that long of a window to actually be onboarded as a JP Morgan customer. And that's tough, and most banks are the same way. Whether it's us, whether it's Citi, whether it's HSBC, pick a bank. That's kind of how we actually worked. You know, people joked about the 2-martini lunch. Well, we don't really do 2 martinis, but that thing still happens, right? And that's how we kind of think about our relationship management a bit. But what we notice is the target audience is different today. We start showing up at clients, we're not seeing just the CFO in the room, we're seeing the CTO in the room. We're seeing the engineer in the room. We're actually seeing the engineer asking for specifications around APIs. They're asking for what are our SLOs, what are our SLAs? Conversations that we'd had after they became a client and now are part of the conversation up front. And so how we think about what we're selling needs to be different. The other realization is we're selling technology. We're not necessarily selling the banking relationship anymore. So we're becoming a platform that others are building on. So we have to shift how we think about things overall. A couple things that didn't work, and those are JP Morgan folks in the room will probably nod their heads to this one. Challenging the status quo. I'm totally guilty of this. Running headlong into the wall and saying, we're going to do something different. All that does is create fear. The organization reacts. Your customers react to that because they're not necessarily aware of that. Changing how you build systems and architectures, right? We build We build systems with Oracle. We build systems with a mainframe. This is what we use. We've always used it. We've done it for 30 years. And then running in and saying, no, we're not going to use MQ. We're going to use an API. Or we're going to use Kafka versus MQ. Or we're going to use a spanner database versus something else. Those things challenge the whole organization because they're not prepared for it. And your customers aren't prepared for it either because they're expecting what they have today. I'm going to send you a file, right? I'm going to send you a batch job. I'm going to create a direct connection between you and I. Those are completely different than what we need to be doing going forward. So challenging that head on really creates a ton of resistance. Like folks push back against it. Debates without customers, without facts and customers. This is killer within the banking industry. What we're finding is that we think we know what the customer wants. So we build something and then it sits on the shelf. We never had the muscle to go out and sit with the customer and say, how do you want this to work? How does this solve your problem? And what we're doing now that's different, and I think different than a lot of the other large financial services companies, is we're building small prototypes. And then we're sitting down with the customer and saying, how does this fit? How does this work? We're using the opportunity here at this conference to sit down with a lot of our customers, particularly on the CB side, to say, look at our new products. Does this solve your problem? Maybe, maybe not. And then tweaking it and going from there. Before we launch this big thing and saying, we're going to solve world hunger without really knowing if it actually is palatable. Right? Facts. What are our customers doing? How are they actually using our systems? Collecting data. Collecting data around the performance of our systems and being transparent about it is something we've never done. We send you a file, you send us a file back. Do you know that it happened in 20 milliseconds or 2 seconds? Does the customer have any visibility into that? So what we're changing is we're becoming more open. We're showing the facts about how we build systems and showing them to our customers. And that's a completely different kind of mind shift within our organization, but within financial services as a whole. What worked? What are the things that work to help us transform our business and how we're actually doing things? External influences, you all the fintechs that are starting up, whether they've gained traction and they're a third-party payment processor like a Stripe, or whether it's somebody who's building a new ledgering system that we've never seen before, or it's somebody who's doing billing or data aggregation around different banks. All those things really are competitive pressures that are forcing the large financial institutions to change. Right? It's pressure to stay competitive, but it's also pressure to build a more technically savvy product set for customers that are looking for that. And basic transaction economics. Payments are getting cheap, right? So we have to find a way to be more efficient and find ways to expose the secondary products like data to our customers so they can take advantage of it. And not only our customers, but our partners. The other thing that works is building an internal brand. I think the cool thing, if you look in this room, there's a lot of JP Morgan folks sitting in this room, right? We have 270,000 employees. We have 50,000 in technology. We have 7,000 technologists in payments alone. Yeah, it's a big number. Like the overall budget within payments is almost like $1 billion for technology. It's crazy, like how much we spend around technology. And we step back and think about that. We're really a technology firm, right? We build technology and we build it at huge scales, right? We talk about like the fintechs and stuff, but most of the back ends to the fintechs is JP Morgan. If you look in this room, one of the kind of the scary things if you think about it, 50% of the US households have a Chase account. 80% of the Fortune 500 have a JP Morgan account. Put those two numbers together, 99% of the people in this room got paid through one of the systems this team runs. You were either sent your check from your company and they had a bank account, or you had the bank account. That's a crazy thing to think about when you talk about scale and impact to everybody around. But we as a firm and we as a technology group never really recognize that. And so what we're starting to do is build that brand internally of these are the problems we really try to solve. And we're really technologists trying to solve those problems. We just happen to deliver that technology for financial services. And it's a different spin than we've had in the past. We've always thought of ourselves as bankers, but we're not really. We're really technologists. Where are we now? I'm well ahead of schedule, so you guys are all going to get some time back today because I'm blowing through this deck. I'll let you ask some questions. We've been an integration platform, and I think a lot of financial services companies and fintechs have been integration companies. We plumb directly to you. You create a connection to us. If you think of the Fiservs, the First Datas, Visa, MasterCard, how do you connect to those? Well, you stand up a network connection, you get on their MPLS network, you create a VPN tunnel, you plumb all this stuff really hard. If you want to do a transaction to the Fed, you want to do a transaction to the clearinghouse, you're setting up MQ brokers on each side, proprietary messaging schemes, you know, Swift, the Swift network. Now I have brokers and hubs and everything else, and I'm connecting all those together. It was all point-to-point B2B integration. You weren't a platform. Like, you were an integration company, right? But we're becoming a platform. And what we realize is that other companies are building on top of us. So we look at our customers and say, we're giving you a platform to build your platforms on. And whether that is a large marketplace that's doing checkout, right, and they're using merchant services and our acquiring rails, or whether it's a TS company that's trying to move money, large scales of money internationally, or trying to do things like FX at scale, right? They're actually building those software platforms, and some of those are household names to y'all, off of the platform that we're building. And that's a huge shift, because it's not point-to-point integration, it's democratizing the banking services that we're providing. So it's really tech and finance coming together and realizing that they have to be conjoined, right? You can't sell the finance without the tech, and vice versa. The other thing is API and cloud first, and that is a huge change for us. And there's two reasons for it. One is APIs give us flexible connectivity, right? It allows our customers, our clients, our partners, you all, to connect to us and use what we have with next to no barrier of entry. When I started here 7 years ago, RTP was just coming out, and we were going to be the first bank to offer RTP. Kind of cool. The initial idea from a product perspective was we were going to offer it over MQ, and we're going to ask every one of our clients to install an MQ broker and create a VPN connection between us and them. Like 7 years ago. We convinced them, painfully, but convinced them, that we were going to do an API, and we struggled. We stubbed our toes. It was probably the ugliest API I think I've ever seen. We took a REST call and converted it into a binary blob of a Swift ISO message and then jammed it into the payload and said we were building APIs. That's not really a good API. But we've evolved, and now we have a full catalog of REST APIs as well as some functional APIs that connect things together. That's a huge change for us. And then cloud, bringing the services to where our clients are at. If you think about startups, right, and fintechs, they don't run data centers. They're running in the cloud. It's a lot easier for us to bring their data to them and our services to them, whether you're running in Azure, GCP, or AWS. How do you get access to our services? We bring it to you. And that's a huge change. So we're not running just within our data centers, we're running where our customers are at. Right? And I think that that's a really interesting shift from where we were at years ago to where we're at today. And that's not saying that we don't run our own data centers, we have lots of them. But we're starting to shift. Data is central to the value proposition. I talked about this a little bit earlier. The cost of a payment has gone down drastically over the last decade. Right? We used to make a ton of money on interchange rates, the cost of the payment itself. That's gone down by like 70, 80% in the last decade. There's really not a ton of money unless you're doing a huge amount of volume in payments itself, right, and the transactions. It's the data that's associated with it. You know who your customers are interacting with. You know what kind of transactions they're doing. You know their behaviors. You know the things that are working for them, the things that they're selling, the things that are sticking on the shelf. Knowing all that information about your customers and their business is really the value proposition for financial services and fintech to be able to give that data back to them. And so you're going to start seeing a lot more of the platform become a data platform than it is a transaction platform, where the transactions really just feed the data off the back end. Yeah, go ahead.
So for your cloud strategy, right?
Sure.
I see, JP Morgan Chase, a lot of history, right? So I'm sure you have a legacy stuff.
Oh, yeah.
And also at the same time, huge scale. Right? So when I think about cloud, the scale scary because it's a lot of money if you don't do it right. And at the same time,
Yeah.
a lot of your legacy stuff sometimes might not be very cloud native, so you might not get a lot of that like goodness of the cloud. What's your approach to those two problem statements?
I think there's a couple different things around that. One is, you're 100% correct. Cloud doesn't necessarily save you money. And everybody's like, oh, cloud, like I'm gonna save a bunch of money on the cloud. You're not. Like, ideally, you're kind of in a space where you're gonna break even with what you're spending today. The difference is you're spending the money differently. I can have 32 test environments and spin them up when I need them, then turn them off. If I'm gonna do that in a data center, that's sunk cost. It's capital expenditure that's never gonna go away, and it's really tough to repurpose it. So you shift your spending model from a CapEx model to an OpEx model, right? And so you spend as much, but you spend it differently. From the scale perspective, it's interesting. We have a very interesting mix of different transaction types because we do card acquiring. If you look at that, Friday night, 5 o'clock, they're really busy, right? Monday morning, they're really busy. Lunchtime, right? Think about that, Cyber Monday, Black Friday, all of those things, they're very peaky, right? But then we have other transaction types where you think of like RTP, wire, ACH, where they're a very consistent draw for an 8-hour window of the day, and nothing happens at night, right? So we have very interesting transaction models, right, that have different peaks and valleys throughout the day and throughout the calendar year. What cloud does give us the ability to do is to blend all of those costs together and be able to leverage the fact that we're up a little bit on this one, but that one's flat or a little bit low over a period of time, and take advantage of blended costs around that. So it does provide some advantage. The legacy integration is really hard. And you have to think about how do you want to integrate with them? Because a lot of them don't support like a RESTful API or gRPC or anything else that you want to connect into it in a more modern way. You're still going to be sending files. You're still going to be going over MQ. You're still going to be making a database call to DB2 on a mainframe. That stuff doesn't go away. You have to think about the boundary points in your architecture where you're comfortable kind of going from a highly distributed model down to something that's a much more narrow communication path and maybe single-threaded. And those are the things that kind of get interesting because you change the model of processing from highly distributed, multi-threaded, event-driven to a linear programming model that has a very narrow queue of data going into it. So you just kind of have to think about those changes and where you want to interact at, right? Because if you don't think about that, you can easily flood the back-end system, right? And the other way around is you can easily overwhelm the front-end system because they're very good at serial processing. So you just have to think about it. Hopefully that helped. Other questions before I move on? Because I'm almost done here, guys. Like, you're going to get a ton of time back. I think the important message here is that you as technologists have a seat at the table. You're driving your businesses. Whether you recognize it or not, you are. And I think we, as a bank, have finally realized that technology is driving the business. One of the things that's fundamentally different is that we have all these senior execs that are running product, and they never used to talk to technology. Today, some of us in this room sit on cabinets with our CEO of our business, right? Technologists at the table helping drive product decisions. That's unheard of in banking. And I think that's a fundamental shift in what you guys are driving, but also what we're driving internally within the firm. So tech is a product. You have a seat at the table. Leverage that seat at the table. Where we're heading. Talked about this. We're building a platform for engineers. I think that's a fundamental shift. I think you all are doing, a lot of you are doing the same thing. We want our customers to be able to find our services, integrate with them, test them, monitor them, manage them, configure them, all in one place. And we want them to be able to do that before they become a customer. We want them to be able to try it out. We want to kick the tires. Tell us what works, tell us what doesn't work, and then want to become a customer versus hiding everything behind the curtain and saying, voila, you've gone through KYC, 3 months later, you can actually see something. We're trying to invert that model and really open things up. Building services for platforms. We're not the only platform. So if somebody's building something on Amazon, why wouldn't I just feed your data to a Kinesis stream versus making you get a file, right? Why would I ask you to get a file if I can just drop your data into an S3 bucket? Right? Starting to build our services so they integrate with what our customers are doing. If you're working in an ERP, instead of have an ERP integrate with us. Why don't we push that and integrate directly with the ERP? Right? Why don't we integrate directly with the other providers that are out there so that you all don't have to go figure that out? So building services for other platforms, I think, is kind of critical to where we're going. I talked a little about delivering capabilities where customers are. There's two kind of angles to that. We're a global bank. We're in 160 plus countries. I think that's the number. Or it's 160 currencies in 120 countries. I always flip those two numbers. But it's a lot of places. You don't want to have like tap and wait, right? You don't want all your transactions to go back to the mothership in New York or Oregon or wherever else we're processing from. We need to start moving processing out to the edge, right? So that your customers actually can interact with things faster. So that's one angle of it, right? So moving to where your customer's at, but also moving where your platform customers are at and where they're building their systems. So getting your services to where they need them, whether you're in GCP or AWS or Azure, getting it out to where those platforms are actually being constructed as well. I think the other thing, and I talked about this a little bit, is solving difficult engineering problems at scale. You think of our card acquiring platform, like Chris is in here, like is it about 5,000 transactions a second through one pipe? Yeah, 7,000 now. That's a huge number. Like when I was at PayPal, it was like 400 transactions a second. I think they're finally over 600. Like that's 10 times that volume. It's a crazy number when you think about it, right? That doesn't count the $9+ trillion that we transact over our treasury rails every day. Just the sheer scale and trying to be able to solve those things, trying to be globally consistent around that. How do you handle multi-region replication in a relatively synchronous way so you can't lose data? Trying to solve those problems are really hard. A number of the platforms we run are what they call systemically critical. In fact, about 80% of the systemically critical applications in the US run through these platforms. If they go down, Wall Street's gone. Right? So trying to solve hard resiliency and availability problems. Engineering first is kind of where we're going. Right? And leveraging modern stuff to do it versus a mainframe or a tandem. So a couple key takeaways, and we're going to finish way early. It's difficult to challenge the status quo. Like it's turning a huge ship around to get there. Find ways to build relationships, find ways to convince others based upon facts and data is a lot easier than just trying to push the rock up the hill. Identifying key stakeholders, and the stakeholders usually are your customers, not your executive leadership. Find customers that will actually support you, and you'll be able to deliver a better product. And then relationships equal better products. It's not a tech thing always. And that's the hardest thing as a technologist, like as an engineer. You all think that, oh, I built the best thing in the world. It is robust. It's never going to go down. It's performance. It uses all the latest, greatest technologies. But if nobody knows about it and nobody wants to use it and you don't have the relationships to get it to market, it's just going to sit on the shelf. So focus on your relationships as much as you do on the technology, because that's what's going to enable you to sell the technology. And that's it. I'm going to give you all a bunch of time back. Any questions or anything?
Jack, you talked,
Oh, sorry. Go.
Jack, you talked about some of the directional investments that you guys are making and starting to steer more towards the developer community. You mentioned the developer portal at the very beginning of this. Can you talk a little more specifically about some of the specific products or the things that you and your team are looking to engage with the developer community?
I think there's a couple really interesting things. First is like the developer portal, I think is transformative because it opens up our whole platform to potential clients and existing clients. So you don't have to be a customer to see what we can do. Where in the past, you had to go through a whole KYC process and you had to wait weeks and months to get access just to documentation. So that kind of changes the game for us as far as just visibility. The other thing is we're trying to open up the platforms and allow folks to integrate the way that they want to integrate. So instead of us forcing you to have a sign-on and like giving you a JP Morgan ID, you can start signing in with like your Facebook, your LinkedIn, your GitHub ID onto our platforms. You can bring your own identity, whichever one you choose to use. You don't have to bring your corporate ID. You can try with your personal. And I think it's one of the things, like when I build stuff, and a lot of places are like this. It's really hard to build it inside the four walls of the company you work for. There's firewall rules, there's hardened PCs. You just can't do as much as you want to do and kick the tires. So I tend to take stuff home, play with it in my laptop, kind of figure out how to make it work, and then bring it to work. That means I need to sign in with my Gmail address, or I need to sign in with my LinkedIn. Like before, that was really tough with us because you had to have a JP Morgan corporate ID. So how can you play with it at home if you don't have a corporate ID at home? So I think bringing your own identity is another really interesting thing that we're doing. We're going to start getting into more streaming. I think that's from a data perspective, not just giving you APIs and giving you access to the data through files and other stuff, but really allowing the customer to get a continuous stream of events about the transactions that they're processing and being able to react to those events. Helps them build a more scalable platform and gives them quicker insights. So that's something interesting. So.
Yeah, so when you're working with customers, how do you decide if you're actually solving their problem or if you're just building a faster course?
Ooh, that's a good question. You really need the customer to be vocal in this one. And some customers are and some aren't. We're fortunate that we have some customers that will really tell us when we step in it and it doesn't work. And they're pretty loud about it, so that it does help with that. I think the other thing is really building trust and starting to try to develop empathy with the customer or the problem they're trying to solve. Like, how do you live in their shoes and what they're working on? And that takes a time commitment to do that. And I think we're getting better about doing that. I don't think we're perfect at it, but I think that's the biggest thing is that empathy and really spending the time with them.
What would be the key measurements of the success of the effectiveness of the platform? Would you envisage the number of clients that you have and speed of product?
So I think we look at it kind of differently. I think there's a shift in the mode of interaction, so the modal of transport. So we want to see things shift from web UIs and file to to API. I think seeing that shift in the transaction volume is important. It's really tough to measure volume-based statistics because if you look at the volume of e-commerce over the last decade, it continues to grow like this. So it's really difficult to separate out, is that growth based upon the new platform or is that just organic growth within the industry? But I think if you start looking at existing clients and the shift in their usage patterns, that really kind of shows that your platform that you're building out is more successful. And I think as you adopt new clients, the new capabilities getting used for new and innovative use cases is the other marker that you're building something that's worthwhile. So you kind of have to look at those kind of three lenses to say, am I actually growing transaction volume organically? Are you looking at a shift in usage behaviors? And then are the new things that you're building getting adopted in ways that are kind of unique and innovative and satisfying those client needs? That's a good question. There's a push. I mean, we're on the advocacy boards for Swift. We're on the boards of the clearinghouse and a number of the other back-end rails per se. So we have a front seat to kind of drive some of this stuff. But I think what's interesting is there is a push. If you look at what's going on with Swift and ISO 20022, there's a push to build an API set around that. They've struggled with it for a couple of years because ISO and API aren't necessarily congruent if you look at the behaviors of them. But there's definitely a push on the rails to go do that. You look at what's going on with FedNow and real-time payments. There's definitely a push in the industry to get there. So I do see changes in that, particularly to more real-time. I just think real-time will start cannibalizing a lot of the existing things like wires and other stuff down the road. But you're just seeing evidence of that in the market now when you look at volumes. So
following up on that comment, what do you think about wires of that now cannibalizing the wires revenue? Are you thinking about that internally?
that's above my pay grade, but it really is. I think it's going to be interesting. I think just giving customers choices about how they want to transact is really the kind of the key thing. Us as a bank, we need to be able to give them what they need and where they want it. So we're going to service all of those. I don't think there's going to be a forced exit of any of those over a period of time. But that's my opinion. It's definitely not the opinion of the firm per se. That's how Jack looks at it. So had to get that little caveat in there. Cool. Any other questions?
Jack, you better refer to your own personal journey and going from behind the keyboards now spending more time influencing executive management or having a seat at the table and kind of viewing that as a positive light. But interested in terms of maybe like a quick pro of what you see of your new role where you're spending more time influencing and making product decisions. And what do you guys?
What do I miss?
Yeah.
I miss the tangibility of actually seeing something get built and spending the time to go do it. I think that's the thing that frustrates me. Folks that work with me see that every once in a while because I want it now and I can do it. And then I realize I don't have the time to go do it. So I think personally, that's my biggest challenge in the change in my role. But I think as engineers as a whole, you have to have a relationship with the product and you have to be the champion for the product that you're building. And you have to understand your business. And I think that's the fundamental shift that's going on. If you look back in time, engineers would just they would get specs. Go build this. Here's a bunch of JIRA tickets. You don't really understand why you're building it, what's going on. What you're seeing is a shift to the engineers are driving the products and they have to be aware of the products. And I think that's a really important shift because we'll build better products as a result of that. So.
I read on the news some time ago, like how many billions of dollars left from banks into the Apple savings, right? Now you're getting players like Apple, right? Or big technology companies like starting to, come to the fintech space, and I think it's creating a little pressure, right? How is this affecting like JPMorgan Chase's strategy moving forward?
Well, it depends if they're using us for the back end for that or not. No, I think there just has to be an awareness of it. The ability for other technology companies that aren't really in financial services or even just startup fintechs to be able to carve off niches that we're not aware of, or we just don't have the capacity to go address, is always going to kind of push the market and cause disruption. I think it's a great thing in the end. There's core services that we provide that are going to be really tough to kind of move away from the banking ecosystem. It can get eroded over time. But I think if you look at what we do and what we do at scale, we can be competitive with kind of anybody because we have all the capabilities. The question is really, do we want to spend the time to develop that niche marketplace, right, to attack that or not? Right? So, again, out of my pay grade. So.
Hey, Jack, question for you. You talked a lot about the transformation journey. Obviously, you also mentioned the amount of client coverage the bank has, everything from your greatest technology companies all the way down to maybe old school, classic, and young and old, everything.
Yeah.
I'm sure as you've been doing this transformation, you get a lot of various feedback. And also a lot of bespoke ask. We're so and so, do this for us.
Yeah.
How do you handle that and keep this modernization going and be flexible?
There's two things I think about. One is how do you drive configurability into the products that you're building, right? I think of kind of going back to gang of four patterns from the 79s, from 1979. You're looking and say, well, I have the flyway pattern, I have the decorator pattern. You think your product's the same way. You want to be able to decorate your products with capabilities for your customers, but not necessarily have them for everybody. And it's really kind of thinking about how you build modular systems and components from a product level. And we've never really done that. We go in and we surgically go put in a field to say, inspect field 34 in the ISO 85.3 message because this customer uses that to indicate that it's something. Well, now you've just bastardized your system in perpetuity. It's never going to go away. It's not in the code, and you can't get it out. Versus saying, well, when I do my field parsing, I have a set of configurable parsers, and I can look at it and say, I add in this parser if the identity that came in was from that client, and the rest of the time it passes through. There's ways to do that kind of customization without having to surgically go in and change your systems, and I think we need to get better about that. I think that's the first thing. So that's the system design side. The other side is on the product and sales side. It's great to have one huge client and be able to win that client. And those marquee ones are fantastic, right? Because everybody can hang their hat on and say, look, we did that. That big one's there, right? But if you can do 5,000 smaller clients with a higher profit margin without having to do that customization, that's actually a better revenue stream and a better profit stream for the bank than just the one big one. And so it's really kind of stepping back and thinking about, what are we trying to sell? Like, are we trying to be Henry Ford and build lots of Model A's, right, and have a really good profit margin on it? Or are you trying to be Bentley and sell 12 cars a year that are highly customized? Ford makes a heck of a lot more money than Bentley does. I'd rather be Ford than Bentley. You know. Hope that makes sense. Other questions? Cool. Thank you all for your time. I appreciate it. Have a great afternoon.